Hi there, my name's Astra Jenkins and I'm a research assistant with the Exeter Fudan Global Thought Network. I'm also an MPhil International Relations candidate at the University of Oxford. I'm joined today for our interview on Montesquieu and his reception in China by our participant, Professor Demin Duan, a faculty member of the School of Government at Peking University, in addition to Professor Dario Castiglione from the University of Exeter, who will also be posing a few questions to Demin on this topic. So thank you very much for joining me today, to the both of you, and especially to you, Demin, for being our interviewee on this topic.
Hi, thank you very much, Astrid, for having me today. I'm very glad to be in this interview.
Great, it's great to have you. So it would be great if we could just begin with a bit of insight into your academic background, and in particular how you became interested in political philosophy and Western political thought in particular.
Yeah, sure. So I'm mainly teaching and researching in the field of political theory, history of political thought, and I began to study political thought or political philosophy when I was undergraduate student in China. That was quite some time ago, and I read a book about liberalism, which was written by Professor Li Qiang, who was also my mentor in Peking University. And he introduced the main ideas of liberalism into China and many authors within this field. So I found that book fascinating and began to think more about various political systems around the world, and especially the kind of ideas behind all these diversified political systems. And that helps me to reflect upon China, the Chinese political system. And this sounded especially new for me and for a lot of other fellow students like myself. So I got fascinated by this field of study, and later on, so I went to Europe, to University of Leuven in Belgium to pursue my PhD study, and I focused on a very good and famous French political thinker, Alexis de Tocqueville. So I wrote a PhD dissertation on Tocqueville's ideas of freedom. And ever since, I continued to study and publish on topics such as Tocqueville and Machiavelli and the political representation. And also, I did some research on comparative political thought, like Confucianism and its contemporary relevance, and how Confucianism may be compared to some Western political thinking. And yeah, I still continue to do this and teach also in this field. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much for that introduction. And in addition to your work on Tocqueville, Machiavelli, and Confucian comparisons, understand that a lot of what you've done has been on Montesquieu, which is on the focus of this interview, as we mentioned. And so it would be great if you could just speak a bit on Montesquieu's reception in China, when his work was first studied and when it was first translated for consumption in China.
Sure. So as I mentioned, I studied and did research on Alexis de Tocqueville, and Montesquieu was also a very important French political thinker that was on my study list for quite some time. And he was one of the favorite authors of Alexis de Tocqueville. So there's a strong link between these two authors. With regard to the Chinese reception of Montesquieu, I think it dates back to a long time ago. I mean, in late Qing Dynasty, so the beginning of the 20th century, actually. So the first translation of Montesquieu's work would be The Spirit of Law, I think the very first translation was published in 1902, but it was a translation from a Japanese translation of this book, and it was also a partial translation. It was only the first half of the book. Sometimes people don't count it as the first translation of Montesquieu's work. But the very first complete translation of Montesquieu's work, specifically The Spirit of Law, would be in 1913. It was translated by an author, a very famous intellectual at that time, named Yan Fu. And he was also actually the first president of Peking University, where I'm working now. So Peking University is the first modern university created in China. And Yan Fu was one of the first Chinese scholars or intellectuals sent over to the West, to Europe, to study, and later on came back, and they have very deep knowledge of the Western world, their language, their culture, and political system, and so on. So Yan Fu is a very good intellectual. He translated many books, such as The Spirit of Law, and also John Stuart Mill's On Liberty, and well, among others. So this translation so it originated from the English version of the book. So it was actually not direct translation from the French version. So the first the translation from the French version of the book would be in 1961. So it was after, right after the establishment of the People's Republic of China in 1949. So a little bit before the Cultural Revolution, actually. So this would be the first translation. And after that, so the second year, 1962, we would see the translation of another book of Montesquieu, consideration on the causes and greatness of the Romans and their decline, and around that time, Montesquieu's Persian letters would also be translated. So around this time, you would see the three major books by Montesquieu translated into Chinese and published. And also at this time, a lot of other Western classics were translated into Chinese. And so there was a long pause after that. So after 1980s, especially after 1990s, we would see a resurgence of this intellectual and public interest in these Enlightenment thinkers, including Montesquieu, and a lot of new versions of their books have been translated and published ever since. So today we have a lot of new translations, new translators translating their books, and there would be more study of Montesquieu, particularly more academic studies, theses, articles published, some even books published about Montesquieu. As I said, I mean, around 1960s, there were translation of their book, but the study of Montesquieu was very little. But after 1990s, there was there have been a lot of academic studies, Chinese academic studies of Montesquieu in publications. So yeah, so that's pretty much about the reception of Montesquieu in China. Yeah.
Great, that's really, really interesting. I wonder if you know or have any insights as to why there was this resurgence in the 1990s with Enlightenment thinkers and with Montesquieu in particular, and also drawing on the fact that you've worked on kind of comparative political theory. If there have been any Chinese authors that he's frequently studied alongside.
I think there are multiple reasons for why Chinese people or Chinese intellectuals are interested in Enlightenment thinkers such as Montesquieu, or Montesquieu in particular. Maybe I will start a bit from the beginning. So why Montesquieu was translated by Yan Fu in the first place in 1913. So that was quite early, actually. So it was in late Qing dynasty. So Qing dynasty is the last feudal dynasty in China. So after that, there's a Republic of China being established. After that, it was a revolution, and there was a Republic of China being established. And after that, there's continuous revolutions and civil wars, and then Sino-Japanese War, as part of the Second World War. And after that, there's a civil war again, and after that, there's establishment of the People's Republic of China in 1949, which lasts until today. So in late Qing dynasty, there's a crisis, going on because China suddenly finds itself as especially weak and vulnerable, because of these Western powers coming over to the Far East, to Asia. And there was various wars has been waged, and the Qing dynasty was especially weak in this regard, and had to sign treaties that is considerably harmful for the country's interest. So there was a kind of a crisis going on, and many public intellectuals or even government officials trying to look for answers. And one of the proposal for reform in late Qing dynasty is that, okay, in order to solve this crisis, in order to be able to become more developed and become more powerful in fending off these foreign invaders, probably we have to reform ourselves. There were a lot of debate and discussions. One of the proposal would be that, okay, maybe there's something to do with our system, our political system, and maybe we could learn a little bit from the Western countries, such as England, such as the United Kingdom. So they have this constitutional monarchy, right? So at that time China still had a monarchy. So maybe we don't have to, so the crisis is actually twofold. One is, it's coming from the outside. Another is, there's a potential revolution going on. So maybe we do a little bit of reform, like constitutional monarchy, establishing a constitutional monarchy, so we could, solve this crisis both on the domestic and external level. I think Yan Fu's translation of Montesquieu was so there was multiple choices for him to do this translation, and I think one of the reasons that he chose to translate Montesquieu's The Spirit of Laws would have something to do with this kind of a political reform ideas. Maybe Qing dynasty could also be transformed into a kind of constitutional monarchy, so as to be able to become more stable and more developed. So this is the first story, and I think that the reason for the resurgence of the study or the interest in Montesquieu after 1990s has more to do with the open and reform policy that was initiated in 1980s. So before that, we had this Cultural Revolution era, and the state would be extremely centralized, and the economy is entirely state planned. So after 1990s, we had this open reform policy, and that began decades of opening up and liberal reforms. So there's introduction of market economy and privatization of a lot of economic areas. So so that would function as a background of this renewed interest in these Enlightenment thinkers, especially these liberal thinkers, who would argue for more liberal reform, for more liberty in a society. Liberty would be presented, social or individual liberty would be presented as not harmful to the country, but as a kind of a boost for the prosperity of the entire society or the nation. So Montesquieu, along with thinkers such as John Stuart Mill, Adam Smith, among others, are quite interesting to many Chinese people at that time. Yeah.
Great. And within that context, this is the final question from me before I pass on to Dario. How is Montesquieu's work on despotism received in China? And how does your work study that concept as well?
Yeah, so that's a very good and interesting question. Because one of the main focus of Montesquieu's political theory, as I understand it, is the kind of distinction between freedom and despotism, or moderate government and despotic government, and that is actually one of the reasons that Montesquieu was very much welcomed by Chinese intellectuals ever since early 20th century. Because at that time, as I mentioned, Chinese people were trying to find some way out of this crisis, right? And at that time, you would see this prevalent feelings or ideas going around in China that we have to do something new, and the kind of feudal system, in China, which has lasted for like thousands of years, ever since the Qing dynasty, would be criticized. So this kind of dynastic system. There's an emperor at the top, and there's a extremely centralized system underneath the emperor. This kind of a political system was blamed by a lot of people, a lot of intellectuals in China at that time, for the weakness of China, with regard to kind of Western powers confrontation or invasion sometimes. So Montesquieu would be introduced into this debate as a critique of this system, of this what they would call the despotic system, and we have to do something new, right? So one of the ideas would be a constitutional monarchy, but that idea ultimately failed. But the kind of momentum of criticizing the feudal political system was there, and this would actually sit well with the later Marxist interpretation of the Chinese history, because well, I mentioned that the second phase of introduction of Montesquieu in China would be right after the establishment of the People's Republic of China around 1960s. So at that time, a lot of intellectuals would work for the government publishers, to translate these books into Chinese and publish them by the People's Press. So and interestingly, Montesquieu and other early modern liberal thinkers would be presented as the kind of typical capitalistic critique of feudal systems, and Montesquieu is one of them. So Montesquieu is considered as part of this kind of capitalist revolt against feudalism in the West, and it could be helpful in understanding why this feudal system, why this Chinese despotic feudal system would not work. But of course, in this kind of a narrative, Montesquieu and others would have their own shortcomings, right? So it had to be replaced by Marxist thinking, but still, they see this kind of interest in introducing these Enlightenment thinkers. So so you see this kind of dichotomy, or this kind of distinction between despotism and freedom still there. So today, I think this kind of dynamism is still in Chinese discussion of the idea of Montesquieu, or on his idea of despotism particularly, but it would be more complicated today, because one is that there's also more talking and discussion of the Chinese model. So there's a lot of people saying that, okay, the Chinese Asian Chinese system and its Confucian ideas should not be just simply considered as a kind of despotism. There's something more to it. So there's a lot of discussion in this regard, and Montesquieu may be criticized in this line of work. But on the other hand, I think, to me, I think we shouldn't oversimplify Montesquieu's idea of despotism. I think there's much more to this kind of simple distinction between despotism and freedom. Actually, if you read, to me, so this is my own understanding of Montesquieu. So if you read Montesquieu very carefully, I think you will find actually a lot of nuances between so-called despotic government and democratic government, or free government, or whatever you want to call it. Because today, you find this kind of distinction between democracy and autocracy, circulating everywhere, and in academic world and in politics, as if all the world systems could be distinguished into these simple two categories. But if you read Montesquieu carefully, he's not for that. He's definitely not for this kind of simple distinction. You will find a lot of nuances in it. He criticizes a lot of, say, French monarchical system. And he would also find a lot of interesting things happening, for instance, in Persia or in China. He wrote a little bit about China as well. And he would find this kind of value of people's honor and the virtue, or the a value of this kind of communal connections between people, and all these kind of things is largely missing in today's discussion of this simple distinction between democracy and autocracy. So I think in this regard, his idea of despotism is still relevant today.
Demin, thank you very much. To finish in some way our conversation here, I had two other questions, but I think they are quite connected, so I may bring them together, and so then you can answer, and we to conclude our conversation. In a way, what you were just saying about the reception of Montesquieu on the issue of despotism is that, in a sense, as well as a kind of mirror for the Chinese to look at themselves, or to understand what, particularly the big crisis of the beginning of the 20th century for the Chinese society, what he meant and how to get out of it. But at the same time, then later on, you said that perhaps there was a kind of reassessment, or in some way, some of the things that other Montesquieu or other Western authors in some way saw in the Chinese society, but of course, a kind of deformed kind of view. So I just wonder whether, what is the attitude nowadays of the kind of views that the Chinese see coming from the West? You actually then qualified the Montesquieu view as much more complex in a way on the question of despotism. So this is one way. So what is the reaction to this kind of views that come from the West, which of course become part of your own conversation? But connect to this, the other question I had that you can answer them together is it's the other text by Montesquieu, the other famous text by Montesquieu, the Lettres persanes. And of course, what Montesquieu does in that text, as you know very well, is that precisely he uses someone from outside, a fictional character from outside France, to analyze what French society and French politics is about. So I'm asking also, is in the Chinese intellectual context, is any similar examples or using these devices? In the case of the kind of views from outside is quite clear, but is there an attempt to, from the Chinese themselves, to try to see them at a distance? Anyway, so if you can address this series of problems would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So I think to answer your second question, I don't think there's an author that is comparable to Montesquieu in China with regard to this kind of lettres persanes and this kind of form of writing on different civilizations and compare them, and also focusing on the political system. I don't know there's any Chinese author or book that is similar to this particular book, but on the other hand, I think that with regard to the kind of a comparison of different systems, different civilizations, I think the Chinese people have been doing this ever since the 20th century, ever since late 19th century, actually. And the mere fact that these books have been translated into Chinese and published at that time would serve as a kind of example. And the reason why authors such as Yan Fu would be, they are very interested in translating these books, exactly in my mind, to, as you mentioned, to translate them into Chinese and let Chinese people read these books. So, serves as a kind of a role of a mirror, to look at yourself, to reflect upon, what you have done wrong, and in what way you could reform and improve yourself. So these translations of Montesquieu and other books, other early modern authors would serve this kind of a role, I think. And also, if you are willing to consider it, I mean, figures such as Yan Fu would also be like the kind of traveler in Lettre Présente, right? So they go to the West. And Yan Fu studied in England and lived there for quite some years, and later, came back to China. And while he didn't write, such as a book like Lettre Présente, but he did translate all these books into Chinese and try to introduce this to the Chinese intellectual. Because Chinese people, well, we are a civilization, so we have been here like for thousands of years, and we don't have this kind of a history of going out to other civilizations, or probably the kind of a technological means to reach other parts of the world. So we were sort of approached by the Western countries, by the Western people in 19th century. And well, they came over here. Some of them are very good. Some of them, came with warships and so on. So we kind of been brought into this, this globalized work, and in a very shocking way. So authors such as Yan Fu, in this crisis, so they go to the West, sent over by the government, Qing Dynasty government, to study their ideas and systems, and later on try to present, how people over there live, what kind of life they have. So he even, introduced a little bit, the jury system in England. He praised the English jury system and said, say something like, wow, this is fantastic custom to educate, the citizens, and let citizens be familiar with, the justice system, the law, and the notion of what is right and what is wrong. How fantastic! So he tried to present a different kind of people, different way of life, and in this way, I think he himself would serve as a kind of the role of a traveler, a self-critique, and also a kind of a comparison between different systems. Yeah, so this is the kind of a point that I want to make. So what's the other part of the question again? Sorry.
The other part of the question was, in a way, on one hand, it's been useful for the Chinese, I suppose, in that kind of crisis, to see or to use kind of ideas or images that the Western kind of authors were projecting at China to reflect upon themselves. But this also is an imposition, in a sense. So it's a kind of a view. The view from outside can be a critical one, can be enlightening, but also can be dominating. So I just wonder whether the feeling, perhaps nowadays more than throughout the 20th century, is right. Where there are simplification of this kind of view from the outside.
Right. Yeah, I think to be fair, I mean, today in China, there's more pride of our own culture, of our own system, than say before, right? Say 100 years ago or so. So there's this discussion about China model and how China model could function as alternative to the Western democracy. model, and in this kind of a context, I think Montesquieu's idea would be viewed a little bit differently. Not many of these kind of authors would have directly criticized Montesquieu yet, but somewhat indirectly there has been discussion about the notion of despotism. So whether we should categorize the Asian Chinese system as just a despotic system, and these new Confucian ideas would especially be against this kind of talking. Yeah, but again, I mean, in this regard, I think we should probably not be too, unfair to Montesquieu himself, because I think his idea is very complex. And I think one of the most fascinating thing about Montesquieu thought is that he's not really a kind of cultural relativism, sort of thinker. So he has this kind of a distinction between what is good and what is bad, and freedom and despotism. But he also values very much the kind of cultures and customs of different peoples. And I think this should be valued by our reflection upon his contribution today. So, for instance, as I mentioned, I mean, especially in the novel Lettre Présente, he has a lot of critical things to say about France as well. I mean, the kind of a mirror it goes both ways. It reflects the shortcomings or errors of the Persian society, but it also reflects upon the kind of absurdities and sometimes even despotic tendencies of the European societies. So I think this is very interesting factors in Montesquieu's political thought, and then we should learn from him in this regard. So he write this kind of a different culture, different society, different systems, but he hasn't lost the sight of what is right and what is wrong. So there's still a right and wrong in Montesquieu's political thought. So he does not slide into a kind of a pure relativism. So I think this is complication of Montesquieu's thought, and Chinese authors, many today's Chinese scholars who are reflecting upon Montesquieu would also notice this and think that Montesquieu is very valuable in understanding of different societies around the world today. I mean, we have this all these different societies around the world, and Montesquieu's his method and his ideas is right and wrong, but we have to take into consideration the cultural differences and the particular system of beliefs and so on. So his approach is still valuable to many Chinese authors who are doing research on his thinking, and I think this would be very constructive. Yes. Okay, I'll stop here.
Well, thank you so much. That was a super interesting note to end on, unfortunately, because we don't have any more time. But we've done very well, I think, in having a great outline both of the historical reception of Montesquieu and looking more at his philosophy as well. So thank you so much for your insights today, Demin.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you for doing this interview.
Sure. Thank you very much.